Welcome to the 2024 Fall Path to Macro Social Work Alumni Guest Speaker Series. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Becca Bass, who I will introduce in a second. But first, just the whole point of this series is twofold. One, to highlight the really cool and interesting work of our alum, and impactful, I'll say too. And then also for students and just alums out there to highlight different paths towards non-traditional social work. I work with many students who are interested in macro work, but they don't understand what a macro career looks like. So this is sort of showing what that looks like. Um, I have the pleasure of introducing Becca Bass, who will present for about 40 minutes or so, most likely, and then we'll open it up for questions. Becca is currently the Director of Strategic Program Development and Grants for Say Yes Buffalo. She received her MSW from UB in 2022. She's a former student of mine who I was so glad to see in this position. Actually, I was meeting with a colleague, Sylvia Lloyd, a couple months ago, and I was helping her get some data that she needed to give to Becca for a grant, and she was just raving about how Becca is able to sort of translate numbers to stories to make it really meaningful to funders and different systems. So she has a really great ability to communicate to different systems and audiences. And before I turn it over to Becca, I see that Dean Alford's here. I don't know if you wanted to say anything, Keith, but thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's very good to be here, and thank you, Michael Lynch, and certainly Becca Bass. We are looking forward to your presentation. My Zoom connection or connectivity is real spotty today, so I'm hoping that I won't crash. But this is my second time entering the Zoom room. Nonetheless, very good to have you, and so good to see all of the wonderful faces on Zoom screen, at least those who have their camera on. Uh, and we'll go from there. But looking forward to today's event.
Great. Well, thank you, Becca. I will turn it over to you.
Great. Um, can everybody see my screen right now? Okay, perfect. Well, I'm really happy to be here, and thanks so much for that introduction, Michael. It's fun to get to reconnect after having been one of your students. Um, I also apologize in advance. I have some of the seasonal congestion, so if I if I need to take a minute, I apologize in advance. Um, so I assume that most of the folks who are attending are current students who are interested in exploring what pathways of macro social work looks like. And so thanks to your guidance, Michael, I was going to start just a little bit talking about my path to macro social work practice, including some of the jobs that I've had along the way, some of the lessons that I've had from those different jobs, um, how that led to what I'm doing now, and then some broader lessons I have about macro social work practice that I think are worth thinking about. But before I dive into that, I am curious if anyone wants to chime in with, is there anything you're particularly looking to learn or what brought you here today? And anyone can jump in.
I'm looking forward to learning anything you're going to present today. So,
Thank you, Rachel.
I
I'm just
appreciate,
looking,
oh, you go, Haley.
sorry. Thank you, Denise. I'm just looking forward to hearing kind of what started your interest in macro social work and kind of how you ended up getting there.
Great. Thank you, Haley.
And I'm excited to listen to one of our alum talk about what they're doing with their career. So thank you so much for doing this, Becca.
Great. Thank you, Denise. And yeah, I feel free to chime in along the way if you have questions as well, but we'll have a Q&A at the end too. So sorry, I'm navigating some multiple screens here. Um, in talking a little bit about my path to macro social work practice, honestly, the path has been kind of meandering. It has not been a linear path. Um, And honestly, there was no world in which I anticipated winding up in development or grant writing based on my interests in social work and social systems. But I think looking at the whole path helps it make sense. Um, and it was helpful for me in putting this presentation together to take a little time to think about what I learned at each of those steps and how it informed the next step. Um, I do think that there's a lot to be said for thoughtful future planning and goal setting. That's really important. But I think as I was mapping out my path, I was reminded of a quote that I read in Anne Lamott. I think she was quoting E.L. Doctorow, but she wrote about how, well, she was writing about writing, but I think it's true of life, that it's like driving a car at night. You can see only as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. You don't have to see where you're going. You don't have to see your destination or everything you'll pass along the way. You just have to see 2 or 3 feet in front of you. And honestly, that has been my path. I haven't necessarily known what the long-term trajectory would be, but I took each step informed by what I was learning about myself and what I was learning about what I cared about, um, and took each next step based on that. Um, and I hope that that's a comforting thought in school where I think sometimes you don't know what's next. You don't have to see that far ahead if you tune into what you care about and how it aligns with your interests and skills. So, so here's my meandering path. I was really profoundly shaped by growing up with a mom who was first a school psychologist in the district, in Buffalo Public Schools. She That was not a job she left at home or at work. It came home a lot. So I grew up around kitchen tables and everywhere else talking about what she was wrestling with cases, what the systemic issues she was seeing were, what common barriers were for students and challenges. And so that was really formative for me growing up in Buffalo and learning from her. Um, she was also a parent for public schools activist. So we went to protests and to advocacy sessions all the time. We drive to Albany, and that was pretty formative for me too. Um, she then went on to be a charter high school principal, and so I got to watch what went into shaping a learning environment that she believed in and that put into practice all the things we had been advocating for in the public school district. Um, so that was profoundly formative for me and shaped a lot of how I think about issues, what I value, and what I see as the possibility of working towards change. Um, it's interesting though. I think it also shaped for me an understanding. My mom was a real forward activist, and I think it watching her and being part of that helped me reflect on the fact that I think I'm more of a bridger. I tend to be more in the kind of conflict resolution intermediary place. That's where my skills and interests lie, somewhat in contrast to her. But that was really formative for me, and that contrast, I think, helped me understand where my own skills lied too. Um, I also went to the Buffalo Public Schools, but I went to City Honors, which was a very different experience in the Buffalo Public Schools than a lot of students across the district, which I was acutely aware of, and honestly felt that inequity pretty acutely. Um, I then, though, went on to a liberal arts college. I went to a really small college called Haverford. Um, and I, what I loved so much about that is it really helped me develop a different understanding of looking at the same issue through different lenses. So, for example, at some point, I was studying the concept of emotion in a cognitive neuroscience class, in an education class, in a theater class, and in my standard psychology class. And it kind of randomly happened to align, but it lit me up, like the idea that you could look at the same thing through different lenses, and it just deepened and complexified my understanding of the topic. And I think that's something I carry with me and how I look at just about everything. Um, and at the time too, I'll be honest that I I struggled with the transition to a private college, and I did not feel like I was prepared or up to snuff. But I had a really incredible education professor who drew it out of me. And she honored the experience I brought from the public schools, and she held space for me to use my voice, and that was really important for me. So I did not expect to follow in my mom's footsteps in an interest in education, but it was what I knew. It was my lived experience, and I brought expertise, and I felt like that was valuable. And so I started an education reform club. We had dinner discussions about topics. It was a time where there was um, a lot of energy around different models of education reform. And so it was a fascinating time to be leading those discussions and to be exploring my passions and interests. After college, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. But I did know that I wanted to stay connected to a supportive community. I didn't want to just be out there on my own, to be honest. And so I wound up connecting to a service year program that was residential. It was Quaker Voluntary Service. And so I lived in an intentional community house and I worked full time for Habitat for Humanity. Um, that was really incredible for a whole lot of reasons, but I think one is with the Quaker Voluntary Service experience, a huge part of that was constantly asking the question, what are my values and how do I live those values out in the work that I do? And that lens continues to be really important to me as well. Um, and then in my role at Habitat, I had the best manager. I took her for granted at the time. It was my first like real full-time job, and I'm so grateful I had her. But I worked as a family support associate. So I was responsible for identifying what the needs were of our homeowners outside of just the home ownership process, but including that as well, and identifying community linkages to services that could support their success. Um, and that was fascinating because I have always kind of been a systems and context nerd. And so I really got to dig into, also, I should say, it was in Atlanta, which was an unfamiliar place to me. I hadn't been there before I moved down for this program. And so it gave me an opportunity to look at what is the landscape of what's available, what are the services and supports, how are they connected to each other or not, how do people access them, how does geographic accessibility impact the utilization of these different services, where are there redundancies, where are there gaps. Um, and so that was a really fascinating experience for me too, and it got me really agitated about the need to coordinate and align services better. Um, and so that kind of led me unexpectedly to, I worked then for a national intermediary organization that was looking, well, it was Say Yes National. They were working to launch chapters across the country of organizations like Say Yes Buffalo, where I work now, to bring together cross-sector partners and coordinate and align services around educational systems to make sure that children and families have the support they need to navigate school and graduate and transition to employment. Um, that was a fascinating experience being part of a national organization at a high level, not as connected to the ground as I had just been, but with this vision of aligning and coordinating services that was 100% what I was feeling called to as a result of my work at Habitat. Um, I'll talk a little bit more about key lessons in a moment, but from that experience, an important one for me was learning. I think good ideas are maybe 20% of making good change, and 80% is what are the details of how you implement effectively? What are the conditions you need to to implement well? Um, Maybe I could debate on the percentage breakdown, but implementation is where it's at. And I became really fascinated by how much relationships are the crux of things, and people often come to conversations about systems with their own goals and motivations and history and understanding of the issues. And um, oftentimes, the biggest barriers to moving forward good ideas are interpersonal and have to do with how you understand who the people are, what they care about. and what motivates them, and understanding structural barriers that are kind of built into our systems, why organizations and institutions are siloed, why it's difficult to collaborate. So that got me reading a lot of books about conflict resolution and about network systems in my spare time. And I found out that one of the authors was also in New York, where I was, and I set up a meeting with him, and one thing led to another, and then I worked for him. So I transitioned jobs and started working at a research center, the Morton Deutsch International Center for Cooperation and Conflict Resolution. And I pursued a master's in conflict resolution while I was at that job, and was really looking at understanding complex systems, what makes conflicts or challenges intractable, how you can use network theory to understand what's happening and to identify points of entry for making change in a broader system. Um, at some point in all of this, COVID hit, and I had been bouncing around a few different places because of my own life, and COVID brought me back to Buffalo, which is where I grew up. I had been bouncing around from Atlanta and Philly and uh, Atlanta. Did I say Atlanta? Atlanta, Philly, Burlington, New York. Um, but Buffalo always had a pull for me. And so I came back, and as I was trying to discern what was next for me, um, I I felt called to do the MSW program. I felt like I was really reflecting a lot on what my values were, how I wanted to apply them to work, and the social work lens felt so resonant with what I had been learning at every other prior stage, um, about about how things fit together, about how we're nested within broader systems and structures, and we're shaped by so many different things. And so I pursued my MSW at UB. Um, and that was great, both for the lenses I continued to develop and add to my toolbox. I'm big on those interdisciplinary lenses. I also had a kind of eclectic fieldwork experiences. I did one of my fieldwork placements at a school, and I worked in elementary social work during COVID, which was a fascinating, challenging experience, but a very rich one. Um, and then I did a placement at Partnership for the Public Good. So that was much more policy and advocacy. And for me, they seemed totally interrelated and relevant to one another. Um, though on their face, they seemed pretty different. Um, but following that, I I started working full time at Say Yes Buffalo. Um, I had I had been doing grant writing consulting for a few years prior to that, supporting myself through school and also using what I had learned at earlier stages about the Say Yes model to shape proposals for Say Yes Buffalo. Um, but I also came on board as a family support specialist. So I had a split role when I started full time here. And that was incredibly profound and indispensable for me. I think I could have waxed philosophical for a long time before having that role about what the challenges are and what the barriers are and how the system sometimes undermines what the needs of those it serves are. Um, but actually living and doing the work, getting to know families in a different way, similar to my work at Habitat, and in some ways similar to the placement at the school, but really getting into people's um, lives and and understanding their experiences and what their needs are and what their feelings about receiving services are. Um, that was really critical for me. And it deeply informs how I approach grant writing. Um, it also deeply informs how I understand what the challenges are within the broader systems. I'll talk a little bit more about that too. Um, but so that's my somewhat meandering path. Um, and I wanted to pull out a couple of key lessons from all of that. So the lessons make it slightly less meandering, I think, in hindsight. Um, so I realize this isn't on the slide, but as I was looking at it after, I do want to underscore again that I think one of the most foundational lessons for me is the value of asking myself questions about what I value, how that translates into my work, and whether my values feel aligned with what I'm doing for work. I think that that's been a guidepost for me. And I got that from my service year. And I I'm very grateful for that lens. But so stepping back into the slide, I think growing up, like I mentioned, with my mom, who was an activist in the public school system, I always had a sense that systems often don't work well and they don't serve the needs and interests of people they try to serve very often, most of the time. But meaningful change is always worth advocating for. So I feel like I had that sense of fire and energy around we we can't let the systems exist as they are. We need to be hopeful and work towards what we see as a positive alternative possibility. Um, as I mentioned, I loved the liberal arts lens of using different perspectives and lenses to enhance my understanding of a topic. So I think an important thing when you're in school and also when you're out of school is to kind of look at things through those different disciplinary lenses and see how it makes your understanding of things more complex. I think bringing together like sociology and history and social work lenses and psychology and educational studies, like all of those lenses, I think help you understand the same topic in a deeper way. Um, and also, I think an important thing, whether you're in micro practice or in macro practice, is the ability to zoom in to the details and zoom out to the bigger picture. I think that in micro practice, to best advocate for your clients, you need to be able to zoom out, see where they exist within the broader system, and identify points of entry for change. Um, and if you're working at the macro level, if you don't understand and appreciate the nuances of the details of what direct service work entails, you aren't going to be good at the macro practice. You aren't going to honor and respect the voices and experiences of people who are doing the work and who are receiving services. Um, and you'll miss important pieces of what could make the system work better. Um, as I mentioned too, services are so often siloed and redundant and hard to access. And I think that there's incredible potential in better aligning services, bridging gaps, coordinating and communicating across organizations. Um, and that can be more resource efficient for the organizations, and it can also be critical for making services more accessible for communities we wish to deliver services to and work with. Um, that is also enormously challenging. There's a good reason that different systems often don't work together. Communication is hard, time is short, missions and goals and priorities are often misaligned. But I don't think that needs to be um, I don't think that needs to win out. Like, I think by understanding the different motivations and goals and priorities of different entities and organizations, I think there is great potential in aligning services and resources in a more coordinated way so that they're more usable and reachable and accessible to our community. Um, as I also briefly mentioned, I think I have learned a lot about how much when you're not in the abstract analyzing different policies and solutions and things, the people are probably the biggest thing that determines the success of anything, really. I think understanding individual personalities, power dynamics, the politics behind how things operate, the relationships between different entities within organizations, across organizations, it's really critical to understand the human element of things. I think that gets back to my emphasis on implementation is so much more impactful and important than just the good ideas. We have lots of good ideas, but we need to look at the barriers to successfully implementing them. And I think understanding and respecting and appreciating the human dynamics that shape our ability to implement is just absolutely critical. Um, I think I learned that a lot working at a national office that was looking to serve individual communities in very different contexts across the country. Um, and I think that's been a lesson in truly every workplace I've ever been in. It's all about the people. And I think that that's also a very resonant idea in social work, and part of why social work was a resonant field for me. Um, as I also touched on, I am a huge systems nerd, and every experience I've had in my professional life has reinforced the idea that all of our social service systems are really complex systems. They're networks of interconnected parts. And when you have thick webs of interconnections, changes in one place has unintended consequences or sometimes unpredicted or unpredictable consequences in other places. And so if you tweak something here, it's going to reverberate over here. And so you need to zoom out if you're thinking about making change and understand how things connect and try to anticipate. Um, it also it also makes clear to me that there are no silver bullet solutions to almost any problem. I think that every major social system or social issue requires us to think comprehensively and complexly about what are the factors that are upholding and reinforcing the status quo, and what are the very many different things that we need to touch and impact to change those dynamics and change the outcome. Um, I also hope this isn't too high level, and I look forward to questions. But I think a last key lesson for me has been just how many consequential barriers to effective service delivery and utilization there are, and how disconnected so many of those barriers are from how policy is set and how I think leadership understands policy. For instance, there's so much low-hanging fruit, and this a lot of this came from my experience doing the family support specialist work. Um, but there are silly things like there are if a child is born and left at the hospital, and if the name assigned on different forms, one is male last name and one is boy last name, you can't change the names to get them their Medicaid card in any sort of efficient way. That seems like real low-hanging fruit for a policy fix. And it's a kind of impenetrable challenge in reality. It shouldn't be that way. Um, and there are all sorts of other things where it just felt like, ooh, if folks at the top really had lived and experienced what direct service practice was, or if they asked more questions of people doing the work about what are common barriers you're facing and how are they impeding your ability to support families, we'd have better policy. There's also things like applying for different services where if one piece of paper is missing, instead of fixing that and um, having the application reviewed in its entirety, you have to start from scratch and go through every interview with every different person at the county. And there are all of these inefficiencies that shouldn't be too complex to solve, but I think a lot of people are removed from the realities of what that looks like. So it makes clear to me the importance of bringing micro and macro lenses to bear, no matter where you're working in the social service system. Um, so I think all of this probably points to the fact that one of my favorite themes or one of my favorite lenses and anchors I got from the social work program is Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems model. I think about this all the time, and it really informs how I think about how I write about what our programs are, why they're important, and how they fit into a bigger picture. So I think I've talked about pieces of this throughout what I've said already, but I think it's critically important for me, and this is actually a terrible, kind of hard to read picture, I'm realizing, but that every individual person is nested within a lot of different relationships and systems that are deeply impactful to how they form. And there's connections between and across um, the people and institutions that shape how we grow. And so if you're looking to make change that is meaningful and positive, you can't look at any one of these things in isolation. The school, health systems, neighborhoods, juvenile justice system on their own, without understanding how they touch other pieces. Um, and I think I picked this version of the ecological systems model because it also explicitly nests all of these systems in a recognition of systemic racism, and historical and intergenerational trauma. The reality is that we're shaped by systems that are shaped by these historical legacies, and we can't make meaningful, equitable change if we don't acknowledge that either. So I carry this in my back pocket, in the work I do all the time, thanks to the UB School of Social Work. Um, but so a little bit more about what I do now. And then I swear I'll stop monologuing. I feel like I don't usually talk this long uninterrupted. But so, as I alluded to, I'm currently working as the director of strategic program development and grants at SAS Buffalo. So, folks may already know a bit about SAS. I think we're probably most known as a scholarship program. But part of what I'm most excited about is that we offer a wide range of cradle to career supports to children and families to help provide all of the comprehensive resources that are needed to successfully get through school, um, and have health and well-being as they navigate their educational pathways. So our model or our mission, um, is to remove barriers to educational attainment, workforce participation, and economic mobility for students in public and charter schools in the city of Buffalo. And we do that through a collective impact partnership. So this is like all the stuff I was talking about, getting excited about in every past step. Um, that um, we work across sectors to through a collective impact partnership centered on racial equity and inclusion, and provide a post-secondary tuition promise, which serves as our North Star, and also cradle to career comprehensive supports designed to increase rates of high school and post-secondary completion and the achievement of fulfilling professional employment. So how do we do that? Again, my systems. This was very exciting to put together because it felt like, oh, it is a cohesive picture when I look backwards, even when it wasn't in any given moment. Um, but so we really do work as an intermediary across a wide range of local partners and work closely with centrally the Buffalo Public Schools, the city of Buffalo, the county, local employers, community-based organizations, children and families, um, community healthcare providers, philanthropic organizations, higher ed, to kind of look at what common issues are, to identify aligned interests and priorities, to target resources to those needs and priorities, and to design and deliver programming that meets student and family needs as they progress along their educational journeys. So, what does that cradle to career look like? We have a lot of programs. So here are all of our programs at the moment. So we offer early childhood programming, including screenings for early service linkages. And we also offer 3-year-old classrooms that are actually embedded within Buffalo Public School buildings. Sarah, who I think is still on the call, is the best, and she is Little Scholars.
He is currently working to set those classrooms up because of the snow day yesterday.
Oh
So
gosh. Good luck, Sarah.
thanks,
Um,
Becca.
yeah, we also have a lot of different school-based services. So the idea is that to provide effective um, uh, case supports within schools and to make services accessible, embedding them in school settings is the best way to make these services accessible to families. So we have preventive services, and we work with the county on that. We have health homes. I'm going to kind of blow through these. I'm not going to read all of them, but we have programming specifically for youth in who are involved in the foster system. We have school-based mental health clinics that we facilitate in partnership with a range of local community-based mental health clinical providers. Um, we have we are the community schools implementation lead for the Buffalo Public Schools. So our team runs Saturday academies and evening programming at community schools, bringing a whole bunch of different community resources together in school buildings to provide programming for everyone from early childhood to and through elders in the community coming to get resources they need in school buildings and to meals. Um, we have legal clinics, we have summer camp programming. Um, we also have a Boys and Men of Color Breaking Barriers initiative. So that's mentoring and positive youth development for boys and young men of color across the district and in the wider Buffalo area. Um, we are best known for our scholarship. So we really see the scholarship as the North Star. We provide a last dollar tuition scholarship for every graduate of the Buffalo Public Schools and public charter schools to attend any in-state public institution or any one of um, our national private college partners. Um, and with that, that then really sets the agenda for us. How do we put supports in place for the entire educational pathway so that kids are ready to use that scholarship? And then we've recently started to expand into workforce development. And so we've implemented a new apprenticeship program where we place youth directly um, into services or into jobs at local employer partners, and they concurrently um, complete related technical instruction at local higher ed partners. So I know that's a lot to absorb, and I talked fast about a lot of things, but I think this this portfolio of work, I think, maps pretty well to that Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems model. So I really see all of our work as tying into a systemic strategy to comprehensively change what supports are available and how integrated those supports are for children and families in our district. Um, and real quick, part of why I actually really enjoy working in grants, even though that's never where I thought I would land, is I get to be connected to all of these different programs we do. I get to kind of work at a higher level with the CEO and our chief impact officer to understand how they're building relationships in the community, what they're learning about best practices in other places, what our overall organizational strategy and goals are, and how we're working towards them. I work incredibly closely with the finance team. I never thought I would do that either, but I now am really, really well versed in budgets and numbers and how you financially support comprehensive and sustainable programs. And it's actually kind of fun. Um, I work really closely with communications because it's important for us to have a common and aligned way of communicating the work that we do to different audiences. And so I love that too. I get to kind of talk with our communications team about how we're presenting our work and how we frame it. Um, I'm always working with data and quality improvement because we're reporting on what our data is and what our steps are to improve the quality of our programs. Um, and so that gives me an interesting lens on understanding what we're doing, how we're doing it, where we're falling short, and how we're adjusting to address our goals better. And my favorite part is I get to work really closely with the program directors and teams across the whole organization, and I get to get in the weeds. So I love that. I love understanding what are you trying to do? How are you trying to do it? Um, how are you hitting those goals? What are you learning? How are you adapting? What is looking different next year? How do you understand your successes? What are you learning from what's not working? Um, and so that gives me the details, the zoom in, and then I also get to zoom out. So I'm going to blow through these real quick. because I think that I touched on all of them earlier. But I think for me, it's critical to be able to look look at the complexity of things and understand how our systems and our all of our jobs, all of our work is nested within broader systems and structures, and will do work better if we can understand where we are in a broader network and how that connects to other things. Relationships are key. It's a whole bunch of people doing work, and really building relationships is essential to be able to do work well and aligned with our values. Um, we need to be able to zoom in and zoom out. I think interdisciplinary lenses are key, being able to look through multiple different fields lenses to get a deeper understanding of how things work, why they work, what the history of their functioning is, and what clues all of that gives us into what could change. Um, and then um, also, I think it's critical if you're working in macro practice to have experience in direct service provision, ideally. And if you don't, to really, really cultivate a practice of deeply respecting, engaging with, and learning from people in direct service. Um, this is a little redundant, but I think systems change is where it's at. Everything's connected, so we have to think systemically. And I think it's critically important to stay resilient and patient because the kinds of changes I think we all want to see as people working in social service systems are hard and they can be slow and it can be really frustrating. But you got to celebrate small wins, take heart in the hope you have for the bigger picture, and tend to yourself in the moments that it's really rough, um, and things aren't changing the way you'd wish. Um, but so thank you for listening to my journey here. And I welcome any questions that folks have.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Having known you as a student and having known Say Yes really well, and now learning more about your path and values, like I feel like you are in the perfect place, both for your values and also your skill set. So great talk, and I'm sure we have many questions. So I will open it up.
First of all, I want to say thank you so much for taking out the time to walk through your experiences and how it's led you to this point of the work that you're doing in the community. And I want to say thank you. I work for the Buffalo Public School System, so I could identify with a lot of things that you were saying. But some of the points, I don't know if this is a question or not. I just want to point out the points that you made that were very powerful and kind of mind shifting into how we uh, do this thing called social work or community work. I love how you said small changes can lead to large unattended changes. That is huge, 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 because sometimes you look at, I've been looking specifically at the historical issues of segregation and xenophobia and intergenerational trauma, which you have mentioned, and it could be overwhelming because of the long history and how it just kind of fabricated into our lives, and trying to see how we can unwove those things can be overwhelming. But I love looking at what can we do, on small scales that can help make those changes in a macro experience, if you will. And then you said, I'm going to be really, 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 really quick, but you said so many great things. Excuse me. Yeah, I love the ingredient for change. I wanted to ask you, you said 20% good ideas, and I know you said you might shift those numbers around a little bit, but I think it's great. I mean, that's good. I think all of us on this call can say we have come up with some great ideas, right? But those great ideas don't get an opportunity to flourish and make those changes unless we look at the details and start implementing and looking at how and what approaches. So did you get that from somewhere, those numbers, or is this just based on your experience that, I have this idea and these are the things, the greater things that need to be done in order for these ideas to flourish. And lastly, look at different disciplinary lenses. I love that approach. We're better together when we work as a team in partnership, and different people who have expertise in different areas that can prevent the systemic approaches that are just a little too complex, but does not include people with different expertise that can make it less complex, if that makes sense. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Becca.
Thank you, Rachel. Actually, I have a couple thoughts with that. I really appreciate you reflecting some of that back because I think with the different disciplinary lenses, I think I would also add that I think a lot of the challenges we have working collaboratively with different people and different departments and different organizations is that we bring different lenses to bear, but we don't recognize we're bringing different lenses. And so understanding things and practicing looking through different lenses makes it easier to collaborate with people in different departments or from different perspectives. And I think that's critical too. And in terms of the ideas versus implementation, I think I made that number up, but it's based in a couple different things. I think one, I remember I did a research project on the history of desegregation in the Buffalo Public Schools when I was in college. And I went to the downtown library and was looking at all the microfilm and finding all of these old reports. And I don't remember the details, but there was a report from 1964 about recommendations for the school district to make things better. And it could have been republished today. Like it was exactly the same stuff that we talk about now. And given that, it's like, okay, we have consultants that come in and give us good ideas all the time, but what are the actual barriers to us doing what we know would work better? And another book that was incredibly formative for me, I haven't read it in a while, but um, Charles Payne wrote a book called So Much Reform, So Little Change, The Persistence of Failure in America's Public Education System, or something like that. Um, it doesn't provide great solutions as a spoiler, but it does provide, I think, one of the best, clearest eyed assessments of why those good ideas often don't take root. And it was really helpful because I think in the district now, I think we have all these conversations that tend to be punitive about what we should do better and hold people accountable to doing things better. But how do we treat the people we want to act better? And how does the way we create working cultures and how we respect our professional staff, how does that impact our ability to actually do what we think would be better? And I don't think that's enough part of the conversation much of the time. But I really recommend that book.
I'm sorry, can you put that book title in the chat or repeat it? I didn't get that. I think it
Absolutely.
was a lengthy title, so I think I missed some parts.
Yeah, so I think I'm writing it now. It's Charles Payne, So Much Reform, So Little Change.
Okay.
There's a
And
subtitle there too, but I think that's enough
okay.
to find it.
I don't mean to hog up all the time. I'm sorry, because I got another meeting in like 5 minutes. Really quickly, you said there was a 1964 um, report on recommendations to change Buffalo school systems.
Mhm.
Okay.
So that is somewhere in the microfilm at the downtown library. I have a photocopy of it in a binder in my attic. I can try to find it, but I think
Oh,
I
if it's not too much trouble.
yeah, I've no promises, but I think the bigger takeaway was just how consistent the discourse is and how consistent the challenges are. Um, and that we need to think differently if we want to change those things.
Great. Any other questions? Maria, I see you turned your camera on. Does that mean you have a question? I think so.
Yeah, so I don't think you talked about like the grant writing process. Because like I've done a little bit of research on grant writing and it looks really dry and arduous and kind of painful to do, but it is really important at the same time. So I was just curious as to like how did you like build the skills to effectively grant write?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I didn't fold that in very much, but um Yeah, so I started doing it mostly because I had knowledge of the program model and the details of the programs from working at the national office. And I had a knowledge of the context here because I grew up in Buffalo at the Buffalo Public Schools. Um, I take care, Rachel. Um, I also would have thought that grant writing is incredibly dull and boring and tedious. And sometimes it is, I'm not going to lie. But I see my role a lot more as effective storytelling. So I talk to program teams all the time about the fact that, like, I think grants have a reputation for being like a gotcha, it's punitive, you have to like show accountability. It is telling the story of what you're doing, what you're learning, how you're adapting, and how you're meeting the needs of a community. And so, and effectively engaging the community in identifying what the needs even are and what supports are needed. Um, so I have always taken a storytelling approach and have tried to like take the fear out of program teams' hearts that if we aren't, we should define realistic goals. If we aren't hitting them, we just need to tell the story of why not, what we're learning, and how we're pivoting. Um, and I honestly think we've been more successful in securing grants because we tend not to write in a pat way. We try to be effective, persuasive storytellers in how we write our responses to grants. Um, and I think that's served us well. I'll also say that I think the field of philanthropy is slow moving and slow changing, but there is an increasing understanding of the role of a philanthropic program officer as being a partner and a co-learner because there's a long history of philanthropic support that hasn't led to the results we've wanted. And so if we keep having a paternalistic top-down approach to philanthropy, we're just going to get more of the same. And I think there's more recognition of the changing role of philanthropy and uplifting and supporting and learning with uh, organizations and programs. Um, and so it feels like an exciting moment to be part of the grant world as some of that's shifting. I don't mean to overstate the shift. It's a lot, it's a mixed bag, but I think we are moving in positive directions there. I don't know if that answers the question.
So, Micah, we close to drawing time here because I do have one question slash comment.
I did see a look on Gwen's face like she might have had a question, but I
Okay,
couldn't
let's
tell.
Gwen, please
Um,
go right ahead.
okay, thank you. So you talked a lot about like liking the abstract and like also like interdisciplinary perspectives and stuff. So I guess I was wondering if you could give us a little more insight into how you zoomed in and how you chose how you wanted to do it because I do know it's very valuable, like the direct service provision. But if you also like thinking a lot, how do you choose how to narrow that in for yourself?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I'm realizing it's like a kind of hard to pin down. I think I I mean honestly, I think landing in grants has helped me do both. Like it is a job that holds both because I have to get into the nitty-gritty details, but I have to contextualize it in a bigger picture way. Um, and I do think again that like whatever whatever kind of social work you're doing, you'll be a better direct service provider if you understand the broader system and understand how to make the system work best for your clients. And you'll be a better macro practitioner if you respect and understand the details that micro practitioners are living in. Um, I don't know if that I think that the balance of holding both and switching from the zoom in, zoom out is different in every job, but I actually think it's necessary in any social work context.
Right, that makes sense. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'll turn it over to Keith, who I believe had something to add.
No, I'll be very brief. I actually think Gwen covered it, and Becca Bass, thank you so much. You were so thorough and really appreciated your pathway, literally, and the many slides that you shared. The one slide that was the pictorial of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems model, wow, that was very powerful. I've seen several of those slides where they depict the ecological systems perspective, but that one certainly, I think, highlights cultural nuance while at the same time uh, obstacles and strengths that we have to be mindful of. Uh, Real quickly, when you talked about people early on in one of your slides, I just brought to my focus that there's micro in the macro and macro in the micro. And I've said that so many times before, but I believe that's what you're emphasizing as well, is that we still are utilizing our micro skills at macro levels. And
Mhm.
when at all possible, bring in the macro to the micro with respect to advocacy.
Yeah. Yeah, and even I feel like the micro skills of social work, it matters how you interact with your colleagues. It matters how you interact with and understand your partners more broadly in the community. And it informs how you think about the systems change that are needed and what the steps are to get there. So yes, I thoroughly agree.
Thank you.
We have 2 minutes left. Does anybody have a closing comment or question? Certainly.
Yeah, I just like to, say, let you know, Becca, I really appreciate it. I kind of got in late because I had left work and I had to work remotely, but I really appreciate your enthusiasm for the work that you're doing. And it just brings to mind, Denise and Sue's trauma-informed lens. And the way that you say, through Brenner's ecological system is kind of looking at all of the systems involved through that trauma-informed lens. Because as the dean just said, you got the micro and the macro, and you got the macro and the micro. And I just can appreciate it because, like I said, it kind of brings everything full circle. But it takes me to Denise and Sue's, presentation on trauma, looking at things through a trauma-informed lens. So I can really appreciate your enthusiasm and I really appreciate your presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Sterling.
So maybe Denise might want to represent that trauma-informed approach to looking at all things through that trauma-informed lens. So hint, hint, Denise.
I got the hint, Sterling.
Um, well, I will close this. I really loved and you'll have to send it to me, your quote about the headlights, because it's sort of how I tend to do things too. Um, So thank you so much, Becca. I feel smarter as a result of having listened to you today, and I also feel more motivated. So thank you so much. I'm so glad to see you're doing so well and doing such impactful work. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for everyone who attended. As soon as I get the recording online, I'll send it to you, Becca. And have a good rest of your Friday, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much for
Thanks,
having
Becca.
me. Thanks. Take care.